I think it's really beneficial to explain that process because I feel like a lot of people want to get in touch. They want to know who they are. They want to grow, but they don't really know what will happen when you start to do that. Did you,
Oh,
or were you ready for that? Did you know, like, hey, everything's going to get flipped on its head and my new life is going to cost me my old one? Or was this sort of the first time in your life that you've really like stepped into this unknown territory of change, like deep change on a physical level and and a reality level?
mhm. Yeah, I think I've made a lifestyle out of it, honestly. I've been doing it for so long, I don't remember life before it really, but, you know, I owe a lot to, my first marriage was we were together 20 years, got married pretty young, had 2 amazing kids, and was that all birthed in an environment of, an easy description of success. I went to church, my dad was the pastor, and I had met this woman, and her dad was a pastor, and we both had done missions work, and we both wanted kids. And then I decided I was going to be a doctor, and that sounds really nice too. And then I went and became a doctor, and I mean, it's so easy to be like win, 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 win. We're just winning the freaking game here, and that's what
Yeah,
I
big
told
time.
myself throughout my 20s, throughout probably the first half of my 30s.
Hmm.
And yet there was this emptiness of life that I could not calculate. It was like nothing seemed to be landing. I felt intense loneliness in my life during that time. And despite the fact of being surrounded by thousands of patients and
Yeah.
great kids and family and amazing immediate family, my parents, my 3 siblings, like, yeah, I looked great on paper. I looked so good on paper. Why was it not freaking clicking? Like, what is the essence of this that is driving me bonkers? And so, my in that 20-year relationship, we started to give each other permission to challenge the worldviews that we had grown up in, and that uncovered deep traumas. In
Oh man.
when you hold safe space for growth, it immediately uncovers the emotional traumas that shaped the reality that you have been living. And when you find those, you realize that your life is a reactive state of trauma management rather than living.
Hmm.
And there's a big difference between those two things. And one is a slow death, and one is a constant rebirth. And I was really craving a constant sense of rebirth and renewal in my life. And I was living a reality of decay and death within myself in the context of a world that had handed us a bunch of social norms and metrics that allow for us to define death as success.
Why do you think some people are more like that? The one you're talking, I relate to you totally. I was asked some point in time what I've had to forgive myself for, and it's for growing because it means that my life does change, and that includes people, relationships, work, where I live. A lot of things change, but I choose me and I choose that growth. So what do you think that is? Because then there are other people where, maybe they could be titled as maybe asleep in some way. I don't know. Maybe I think that's kind of like maybe a generalization that people use, but someone who's okay with the status quo, someone that's okay with these childhood belief systems staying in place their whole life. Like, what makes someone different?
I think that the more aligned you are with the power structures of extraction and colonialism and everything else that we've done, the closer you align your personal values to those, the easier life is.
Mm.
So there's an anesthetization that happens to all of us right now when we decide to make our metrics for success very similar to those that are handed to us. And that leads to this state of general anesthesia where we can't feel anything, therefore nothing must be wrong. And
Mm.
you can do that for quite a while before the deep emptiness or a sense of disconnect within yourself starts to be an extreme source of pain in your life. And at that moment, it will express itself in many different ways. It will,
Like,
well, as a medical doctor, I see the most extreme versions of it. I think that, we have an epidemic that began in the 1990s of autoimmune disease, which is kind of the most blatantly obvious version of destroy self. You're building antibodies in your immune system to destroy your own body. And we saw an explosion of that condition starting in the mid 1990s. And that is certainly linked to things that we did in our environment. Glyphosate, which I'm sure we talked about the last time, is chemical in our food and water systems and rain and everything else. Glyphosate destroys the tight junction boundaries between the outside world and your immune system.
mhm.
And so now that we're eating and drinking Roundup all the time, we are getting into this condition of leak, where we lose track. The outside world leaks in. We don't have a boundary. Immune system reacting to everything. We can't figure out what is self. So there's that biologic reality. But we also called that chemical glyphosate. We popularized it as something called Roundup, which is kind of creepy in the sense that if
Ah,
you're
yeah.
going to normalize a population, you're going to try to round up a group of people, and you're going to try to corral them in a way of being that is not real. You should brand yourself Roundup. And
Wow.
I think that is what happens in the world is we subconsciously name things correctly. I just closed my clinic, which was a really emotional process for me because my primary identity has been as a doctor for almost 30 years now, or as a medical professional in some way, and so it's been a final surrender for me
Well,
of realizing.
congratulations.
Thank you. And the reason for it was because by being called a doctor, it does something similar to branding yourself Roundup. It says, you know what, you all are sick, and I am here to fix you. And I realized I was part of the problem for my patients.
Wow.
My patients couldn't actually completely heal because they believed I had their answer. I have to step out of that role to engage with my fellow humans in a bigger way so that they can heal. And I can be witness to their healing as a witness rather than as a physician. So we're now moving to these immersive retreat model where we will bring groups of people together to be witness to one another's healing rather than asking them to come into a medical environment to receive external inputs to find
Wow.
their health.
Total paradigm shift from, would you even call it a medical standpoint? What would you call it?
I think we're finally tapping into something that's deeper than biology. And um, we have an 8-week program that has developed over the last 6 or 7 years that we call Journey of Intrinsic Health. And it's an 8-week program that helps lay out these 8 fundamental steps towards finding a lifestyle that supports the fundamental biology of human life. And it's very simple stuff. But once presented in a system that allows you to understand your own capacity for biologic thrive state,
Mm-hmm.
it frees you up of the list of diagnoses and diseases that you had previously been defining yourself as.
Mm-hmm.
But this next step is going to be much more powerful because as important it is to clean up the biologic environment for a successful path towards fundamental transformation, the biology only counts for 0.001% of you. And so as a doctor trying to do something to your body to make you healthier, I'm pushing on a lever that accounts for 0.001% of you. The 99.99% of Danica Patrick is actually a vibrational tone that occurs in vacuum space that is perfectly sung by your soul and is resonating out of this light being that animates a biologic possibility of a human body. And so when people are drawn to you, it is not actually for your physical form. Your physical form is the direct result of the tone that is sung below you. And the more that we continue to tell people that it's their physical form that people are attracted to, then they feel a burden to that physical form because they're
Sure.
afraid that that is their identity.
Yeah.
And that's a terrifying thing because that physical form changes over time.
Sure.
And so we think we are losing our attractiveness as humans by living life. Because as I live life, I develop a lot of evidence of life. Got scars on my face, wrinkles on my face, sunspots, less muscle than I used to have, all kinds of evidence of change. And if I thought that humanity would only benefit by my physical form's presence, then I would see myself failing on a daily basis right now. But
Wow.
instead, if I realize that I am actually a resonance chamber that has been defined by a light being to be present to change the way that humans interact with their environment by me just being present because I am a tone as well. And the
Mm.
tone that I have, if I make that the primary agent in my life, there can be no sense of failure. There can be no sense of aging. There can be no sense because the tone is always there. And if I
Mhm.
listen, it is extremely coherent. And so, where we are stepping into is these retreats that are called Journey into Resonance. And I believe this is our next step as humanity. If we're going to change our courses, we are going to have to see past the 0.001% shell. And we're going to have to look into the beauty of the tone that is coming from each light being around us. And we're going to have to be really quiet for a little bit. We're going to have to listen very carefully. And the listening muscles are underutilized. We have not been doing that for a long time. And so if we listen to each other, we will learn to do what I think is the closest you can come to a physical demonstration of a miracle is to sit next to four vocalists who know how to harmonize.
Oh, gives me goosebumps thinking about that.
Just when you find those four people that know how to bring their voices into different tones that when combined create something so vastly bigger than any of the single tones and so not so synergistic that it cannot be additive but is a logarithmic growth of impact of the sound that now is emerging. There's 7.9 billion tones on the planet that we are expressing as human right now. The symphony that we could produce if we were to listen to one another and come into harmony with one another would destroy infrastructure, would destroy chemical matrices that have defined us, would destroy fear itself, would dismantle our our belief of shame. The tone that each of us have is so simple, and it is what provides us a sense of self-identity.